real this time. Yeah. Shabbat shalom, everyone. We are getting towards the end of the book of Leviticus in our Torah readings each week. And one thing that the book makes clear is that extraordinary action is called for as part of our people's calling to be Kadosh Ladonai Elohecha, holy unto Hashem your God. Every 7 years, we read tomorrow, the land must have its Sabbaths of rest from cultivation. And every 7 times 7 years, there must be a Yovel, a Jubilee year, in which the Israelites shall neither reap nor sow. They shall proclaim release, liberty, as some translations have it, proclaim release throughout the land to all the inhabitants thereof. That means to provide for the release and return of all lands to their original owners. And seemingly the simplest of all these injunctions, but to my mind, the most difficult one that we'll see tomorrow enact, is to not wrong one another, but fear or revere your God. I find that so challenging and so important that I'm not only going to speak about it tonight, but we'll do a deep dive in tomorrow morning's Torah study. That final command to not wrong one another and its accompanying rationale for I am Hashem your God recalls the very heart of the Holiness Code, which we read last week, where the Torah commands us not to bear a grudge or to take vengeance, but instead to love your neighbor as yourself, for I am Hashem. That verse in turn echoes the overarching message of last week's reading, you shall be holy, for I, Hashem your God, am holy. One can, of course, understand these crucial phrases of the Torah in one of several ways. And in part, it can depend on whether we understand the command of Yareta as meaning to fear or to revere. If understood as fear, it could be that we are meant to read God's words as a threat. You had better be holy because I am, and I want you to be like me in this way. And if you fail to do it, I will hold you accountable. Thus, do not wrong one another, but fear your God. However, if we understand Yareta as reverence, then God, in effect, is not threatening, but inviting. I, Hashem, am holy, and because of your connection to me, the fact that I created you in my image, have given you these words of Torah, have joined with you in an eternal covenant to make my world more just and compassionate, and have agreed to dwell among you. Because of all that, you have the opportunity, somewhat of an obligation, to be holy too. I believe this actually reflects the text better, because for me, the whole point is not fear, but reverence, awe, respect for the weight of the responsibility we bear. Israel's holiness is not intrinsic, genetic, or a given. Rather, according to the text, it lies in what we do, how we treat others, the kind of society we build, and the kind of people we are and continue to become. So what of this injunction not to wrong another? My first truly great Talmud teacher and colleague and friend, Rabbi Amy Eilberg, wrote an important book recently titled From Enemy to Friend. In calling on us to move from enemy to friend and to be guided by Jewish wisdom in the pursuit of peace, Rabbi Eilberg reminds us yet again of the Torah's profound and difficult lesson that we cannot hope to make the world right unless we act to right ourselves. We have no chance of living without grudges or vengeance if we are afraid, unsatisfied with our lot, or always on the lookout for ways of gaining advantage over others. If we don't want to rely entirely on God, who makes peace in the heavens, to make peace on earth as well, but are ready to accept the responsibility for doing our part in that effort, then we had best heed Rabbi Eilberg's warning that the work is hard and will not come as a matter of course. Particular habits of mind and behavior are required. Rabbi Eilberg's goal is to explore this inner work of peace building, which means nothing less than to transform an enemy into a friend, to move from hatred to caring, from suspicion to fear, beyond tolerance to embrace of the other. The key biblical passage in her book, as one might expect, is the command to love our neighbors as ourselves. The most often cited modern Jewish thinker in her volume is Martin Buber, famous for his emphasis on the life of dialogue and the relationship between I and thou. The personal experiences with peace building that Rabbi Eilberg recounts most often involve Muslims and Palestinians. She also offers cautionary tales of American Jewish communities torn asunder by heated disagreements over Israel. Perhaps because the focus of so much of the book, as of this week's Torah reading, is relations among Jews and between Jews and others in Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, Rabbi Eilberg warns the reader ahead of time that some of us might be wanting to resist or might take strong objection. She cautions, there may be moments when you notice emotion rising in you, anger, horror, even outrage. Perhaps you already feel angry about things someone has said or have been tempted to slam a door shut. When you notice such reactions arising, I invite you to conduct your own experiment in compassionate listening. This technique of attention and self-restraint is something we might learn to practice, and one that seems to me essential to the work of peace building. Rabbi Eilberg works to find a balance between a language of aspiration that tries to stretch the reader beyond our usual ways of thinking and acting, and ideals that might seem a little bit out of reach for most of us, and that seeming out of reach might tell us, well, maybe we can put aside Rabbi Eilberg's message. But I think that the Torah seeks the same balance, and nowhere more than in tomorrow's portion. It is one thing hard enough to observe Shabbat, and quite another to allow the land to observe its Shabbatot. The regulations surrounding the Jubilee have, for good reason, seemed daunting to commentators and Jews seeking to observe them for centuries. But I keep coming back again and again to that simple command not to wrong one another, but revere your God. And since reading Rabbi Eilberg's book, I read this command in light of her recurrent question to us, asked of us whenever we turn away from dialogue, hug a little bit of bitterness or resentment. The question is, what are you afraid of? There is, of course, a lot to be afraid of in this world, because as you might sense, there are some people who do not want peace. They prefer chaos. Some people do not know or trust their own convictions, and so feel inadequate to the task of conversation and dialogue. Some people feel that they have too much at stake in how they have postured and presented themselves, and would feel too much shame in modifying their opinions even slightly, and so resist hearing other truths. Some enemies cannot be won over, and if we do not resist them, perhaps even at times with force, the result will not be peace or friendship, but increased violence and injustice. Yet, some conversations are worth having, even if they lead to disagreements, even if they lead to arguments, and even if, heaven forfend, they lead to the loss of a friend. That stated, Rabbi Eilberg adds a caution, which is, don't ever give yourself carte blanche to avoid the hard work of peace building. Always have the honesty to ask if you are actually trying to avoid it. Not because it is too dangerous, but because it is too difficult. Rabbi Eilberg knows the deeper truth of Leviticus and our entire tradition. The command to not wrong one another is not about the avoidance of others. Rather, it is about a different kind of deep engagement. The only path toward the aspirational hope of not wronging others is the path of conversation and presence with those others, so that we can avoid having any wrongdoing at all, let alone make an enemy rather than a friend. The kinds of encounters that transform strangers into friends, that move us from resentments and negativity to caring, even closeness, from suspicion and fear, beyond tolerance, grace of. May this be the path that spread this Omer period, Sinai, God, Shabbat Shalom. Baruch Tia. We're going to continue. I wanted to present to you thinking about a situation where of not wronging others. We were all very dismayed, I'm sure, with the recent attack in Buffalo, New York. And so I wanted to share with you the joint statement that the Rabbinical Assembly and the United Synagogue for Conservative Judaism released following the attack, in case you were unaware of it and did not have a chance to see it. It reads as follows. Following the attack in Buffalo, New York, in which 10 people were killed by a white supremacist gunman at a supermarket in a black neighborhood, the Rabbinical Assembly, the International Association for Conservative Masorti Rabbis, and United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism issue the following statement. Along with all Americans who value human life, Rabbinical Assembly and United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism express our utter horror at the unspeakable act of white nationalist terrorism against a black neighborhood in Buffalo. We offer our deepest condolences and support to all those impacted by the attack and reiterate our fierce condemnation of white supremacy and gun violence. We commit, along with our institutional partners, to raise our voices against the profoundly dangerous theory of great replacement, which endangers Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, as well as Jews, since white supremacist theory places Jews at the very center of their grossly distorted ideology. And we pledge to continue to educate our communities about the interwoven nature of racism and anti-Semitism. And we pledge to actively recognize that an attack on any of us is an attack on all of us. In 2016, the RA spoke out against mass shootings, as it has very many times, and took a strong stand in favor of gun control by passing a resolution on American gun violence. In yet another explosion of racist hate, the RA and the USCJ unequivocally call upon lawmakers to take all available measures to ensure the safety of the public, to limit the availability of guns, and to condemn white supremacy in all its many forms. As tradition reminds us, not stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. Hope that all of us can understand what the United Synagogue and Rabbinical Assembly